Hello and welcome. I am Rajiv Gupta, a certified trainer and a senior technician at PCMacPlus.com. I am going to review the part 2 of form factors, a subsection of A Plus certification domain 1, hardware, section 1.2a, motherboard, power supplies, and computer cases, their components, types, and several features. Let's discuss the power supply and cases form factors. AT style computer cases had a power button that was directly connected to the system computer power supply. This power switch that you are seeing was actually part of the power supply that actually went in the front of the case. And you had two connectors, which is P8 and P9. They went together. As you see in this picture here, there are two connectors, and this is the power socket, you can call it. Power port, you can call it. It's usually socket, power socket for. So your P8 would fit here, and then P9 would fit here, like that. So you can see here in this picture, you have P8 and P9 with the black cables, the ground cables, next to each other. So that's what you need to remember for your exam if there's a question on this, that P8 and P9 cables always got assembled with black cables inside. So this is about AT form factor. Of course, we have the small connector for Berg, which is for floppy drives, and Molex, which is a 4-pin for the large drives, and that's all we really had. We didn't really have the SATA connectors at that time. So this is called AT style power supply unit. Of course, the AT style power supply unit also required the AT style computer cases, since the motherboard had only one keyboard connector and needed a special hole in the back of the case to access that port. The general configuration was simply a double pole latching main voltage with the 4 pins connected, 2 wires into a 4-core cable. The wires on that power switch were either soldered to the power button, making it very difficult to replace the power supply if it had failed. Also, some of the power supplies used blade receptacles, where you would simply slide into the blade receptacles on the power switch. This here we are looking at the ATX power supply, and you can see that the P8 P9 connector is being replaced by P1 connector, which could be 20 pin or 24 pin, and we also have this 4 pin extra power supply for the CPU, which is most of the ATX motherboards is located right next to the CPU. Of course, we have a 3-pin fan connector here with the blue and white cable here, and then ATX also brought when we started getting the SATA power supply, SATA hard drive connections and SATA CD-ROM drive connections. This SATA power connector, the black one, 15 pin, and then we have Molex, of course, and we have Berg here. So what we need to know about ATX is that ATX supply, the power supply, does not directly connect to the system power button, just like AT. However, many ATX power supplies have a manual switch on the back to ensure that the computer is truly off and no power is being sent to the components. So you can see right here, this is the power switch right there. Of course, this is a port to plug in your outlet for the cable from the outlet. With this switch on, energy still flows to the components even when the computer appears to be off. This is known as soft off or standby and can be used for remote wake up through wake on ring or wake on LAN, but is generally used to power on the computer through a front switch. Another feature of ATX motherboard is a soft switch, sometimes called soft power settings or soft power feature. If an operating system supports this feature, it can turn off the power to a system after the shutdown procedure is done. In addition, BIOS setup can be configured to cause a keystroke or network activity to power up the system, which is called the wake on LAN. You can find that in your BIOS. When a user presses the power switch on the front of the case while the computer is on, the OS goes through a normal shutdown procedure before powering off. The original ATX specification called for power supply to be located near to the CPU with the power supply fan directed to draw in cool air from outside the chassis and exhaust it directly onto the processor. It was thought that in this configuration, cooling of the processor would be achievable without the need of an active heatsink. The first ATX power supplies and motherboards used in a single power connector called the P1 connector that actually had 20 pins. These pins provided positive 3.3 DC voltage, positive 5 DC voltage, positive 12 DC voltage, minus 12 DC voltage, and optional and rarely used a negative 5 DC voltage. The electrical requirements for motherboards change over time as new technologies make additional demands for power. When processors began to require more power, the ATX version 2.1 specification added a 4-pin auxiliary connector near the processor, as we looked at in the previous slide. Later, boards changed the 4-pin 12-volt power connector to an 8-pin connector that provided more amps for the processor. Remember, a 20-pin power cord ready to be plugged into a 24 P1 connector on an ATX motherboard. So you can actually do that. You can actually connect a 20-pin into a 24-pin socket on the motherboard. Here we are looking at Berg, kind of giving you a little better picture here. Molex is another for your large devices. SATA, we can call it SATA. And this is ATX 20-pin. So keep in mind the first ATX P1 connector used 20 pins. The 4-pin 12-volt auxiliary power connector to a motherboard is right there. So keep these things in mind, not just through the concepts, but also visual, so you can identify in case they give you a question where you actually identify some of the components of the power supply. So in this slide, as we already know what voltages are required for you to know in terms of the power supply and the cables that are coming out of the power supply. Originally, the motherboard was powered by one 20-pin connector, and an ATX power supply provided a number of peripheral power connectors. 2 connectors for the motherboard, a 4-pin auxiliary connector providing additional power to the CPU, and a main 24-pin power supply connector, an extension of the original 20-pin version. Make sure you memorize that the orange pin is giving you positive 3.3 volt DC, a red pin is giving you positive 5 volt DC, a yellow pin is giving you plus 12 volt DC, black is of course ground, and blue is giving you minus 12 volt DC. So make sure you memorize that. Here we are looking at the cases form factor, and this is one of the case form factor which is called the AT computer chassis, and the rear of the computer chassis that you see here is very different than what you normally see every day nowadays. Normally you see a case with a keyboard connection, a PS2 connection, USB connections, things like that, all kind of jumbled up in one cluster, where here all we see is a keyboard connector and all these other connections to your external modem, or it could be a mouse, serial mouse here. We have printer connection here, a joystick connection, monitor connection. So you can see that some of these connections are kind of outdated, but we used it in the dongle cords where a connection would be installed on this plate, which is like a slot cover, and then a cable would go onto the motherboard and you would connect that into a 6-pin connector or an 8-pin connector on the motherboard, on the side of the motherboard. I'm sure you remember seeing that on an ATX motherboard. So here, this is an AT case, and if you look at this one, this is the ATX case where you have one cluster right here that actually consists of all the different ports, and whatever is not available on this cluster then is added, which is right here, the video card and of course the network card, the modem, is all added for you using the either the dongle cords or the network, the expansion cards that I'm sure you have seen a video on the expansion cards. So this is right here is ATX. This right here is a form factor called the BTX case, and this BTX chassis is showing you the different location of what it is. For example, the A is for your side panel release switch. C is your AC power supply, which is right here. So here we have ports that you can see different ports. This is a port cluster. If you notice that the ATX port cluster was on this side. So ATX port cluster is here. BTX port cluster is on this side here. So of course, the place where you have the motherboard is laid out on this side, and ATX, the motherboard, is laid out on this side. So different openings. You have openings that the cover opens on the left versus the right. So you have to keep that in mind when you're taking the exam. And of course, you have other dongle ports right here, or the adapter card ports right there. So keep that in mind. Here is giving you another example of how do you connect different cables. Kind of give you a little overview real quickly. Connecting your monitor, you can look at the N, which is right here. This is N, and this is your VGA, and of course this is your DVI connector, which is digital video interface. Here you have your network, which is J, and your USB is here, which is H. The G is also, you have another VGA, and then you have another DVI, and of course you have the green one, which is the mouse, and the blue one or purple one is actually the keyboard. Your power switch, your fan for your power supply, and then this is the opening for another case fan, and some more holes here for you to breathe some air in from the back. So this, and of course I forgot the L. L is your stereo connections right here. This right here is another case factor, which is form factor for the desktop casing. And desktop casing, you can see that everything is kind of jumbled up on one side. Of course, this is a very small case. You can see right here how this case looks. It looks like almost like a shoebox. We have other cases which look a little bigger. We have other cases that I have put some pictures together here for you, so you can see that desktop case doesn't come in one size. It comes in different sizes. This right here is of course your your ports that you're looking for, and they're very similar ports. This completes the part 2 of domain 1.2a, and please recommend PC Mac Plus on YouTube to your colleagues and friends, and don't forget to post comments. Thank you very much.